Hey, Reddit, 27M, need to get something off my chest today. I guess you could say my whole life I've been the one that got overlooked. I've got two siblings, my older sister Sarah, 29F, and my younger brother Chris, 25M, and to say they were always the golden children is an understatement. It's like they could never do anything wrong in my parents' eyes. Meanwhile, I was just there. Growing up, Sarah was the perfect student. Always getting straight A's, involved in all the school activities, and then she went off to some fancy Ivy League college. My parents were obsessed with it. I swear, from the day she got her acceptance letter, they couldn't stop talking about how proud they were. They threw her this big celebration party, invited all the family and friends. It was like we were having a second Christmas just for Sarah's academic success. Chris, on the other hand, didn't even need to try hard. Things just seemed to work out for him. He followed Sarah's footsteps and got into some fancy grad school program. My parents made sure everything was set up for him too. They covered his tuition, helped him move, got him a new laptop, you name it. And then there was me. I didn't get into any Ivy League school. I went to a state college. It was a good school, but I could feel that it wasn't something my parents would brag about like they did with Sarah and Chris. When I told them I'd gotten accepted, they kind of nodded and said something like, "That's great, Michael," but I could tell their hearts weren't really in it. No celebration, no party. I was lucky if we ordered takeout that night. I guess I tried not to let it bother me, but the older I got, the more I noticed just how different things were for me compared to them. It wasn't just the attention, it was the money too. Like Sarah's wedding? $200,000. No joke. My parents went all out: a venue, catering, the dress, everything. They treated it like the event of the century. I mean, they even flew some of our family in from out of state. For Chris, they paid for his entire graduate degree and helped him out with rent until he could get on his feet. Emily, the youngest, didn't even have to worry about student loans. They covered those too. But me? Well, when I was starting out in my career and needed some tools for work, stuff that was essential to even get going, I asked my parents for help. They gave me $7,000. Now, don't get me wrong, $7,000 is a lot of money. But when you compare it to $200,000 for a wedding or paying off someone's tuition in full, it kind of stings. It felt like I was getting the bare minimum just so they could say they helped. And it wasn't just the money either. It was how every time we got together as a family, I felt like the odd one out. At family dinners, all the conversations were about Sarah's fancy job or Chris's latest achievement. They'd sit there talking about their vacations, new house upgrades, or whatever expensive thing they were planning next. Meanwhile, I'd be sitting there eating my food, trying to think of something to contribute to the conversation. But honestly, what was I going to say? Hey, I just finished a big project at work and I'm still paying off my car? It felt like my achievements were just kind of small potatoes compared to what they were doing. I remember this one dinner in particular, maybe like a year ago. We were all sitting around the table, and the conversation turned, as it usually did, to Sarah's latest vacation plans. "Oh, we're going to Europe for a few weeks," she said casually, sipping her drink like it was no big deal. "It's just so nice that Mom and Dad are able to help out with the expenses." Chris chimed in too, talking about some wedding expenses that were covered for him. "I don't know what we would have done without that $200,000, honestly," he said, all nonchalant. And then there was Emily, laughing about how glad she was that tuition hikes didn't affect her thanks to our parents covering everything. I just sat there, trying to focus on my plate, but it was like their words were drilling into my brain. It wasn't just the money they had been handed. Their futures were on a silver platter, while I had to claw my way up and take out loans to get by. Every dollar felt like a struggle while they acted like they didn't even have to worry about it. And the worst part? No one even seemed to notice I wasn't part of the conversation. I could feel my frustration building. My face got hot, my hands were clenched under the table, and I couldn't keep it in anymore. So I muttered something under my breath. "Must be nice." The room went quiet. All eyes were on me. Sarah was the first to speak. "What's that supposed to mean, Michael?" She had this mix of confusion and annoyance on her face, like she couldn't even begin to understand why I was upset. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my cool, but it all just came out in a rush. It means that not all of us get everything handed to us on a silver platter. Some of us actually have to work for what we need. I could tell they didn't get it. Chris just shrugged and leaned back in his chair like it was no big deal. "Michael, you're always acting like you're the victim," he said with that smirk of his. "Didn't Mom and Dad help you get those tools for work?" That hit a nerve. Sure, they gave me $7,000, but when I think about everything they've done for Sarah and Chris, it feels like crumbs.
Yeah,
They helped, but $7,000 compared to hundreds of thousands? It's not the same, and you know it. Mom tried to smooth things over, as usual. "Michael, we thought that's what you needed. We've always tried to give you what was fair." Fair? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. "You think this is fair? You've given them everything. You've practically paved their roads for them. I've had to build mine brick by brick." The conversation spiraled from there, with everyone trying to defend themselves, trying to make it seem like I was just being dramatic. "You're blowing this out of proportion," Dad said, shaking his head. "Needed? No, they gave me the bare minimum. That's the part that hurt the most. They didn't care about what I wanted, only what they thought was enough to keep me quiet. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and left the room without another word. Their voices trailed behind me as I walked out the door, but I didn't look back. I was done being the forgotten one, the one who always got the leftovers. When I stormed out of the house that night, I was fuming. I don't think I've ever been that mad. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to break free, and every step I took down the driveway, it felt like the world was closing in on me. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I needed to get away. Far away. It was late, probably close to 10 p.m., and the streets were quiet. You know that eerie kind of quiet where everything feels a bit too still?
yeah,
That was it. The only sound was my shoes hitting the pavement as I walked. I didn't have my phone out or my headphones in. I wasn't in the mood for distractions. I needed to think. As I walked, the memories of that dinner replayed in my head on a loop. Chris's smug face, Sarah's condescending questions. It was like they were all living in this bubble of privilege and didn't even notice how suffocating it was for me. They were all in their happy little world, and I was just the outsider looking in. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I got. I kept asking myself, why didn't I say more? Why didn't I really let them have it? But then I realized, no matter what I said, it wouldn't have made a difference. It was like talking to a brick wall. They had their version of events, and I had mine, and there was no way those two things were ever going to match up. I ended up walking to this park that I used to hang out in when I was a kid. It wasn't far from the house, maybe a 15-minute walk. There was this old bench near the playground, kind of hidden in the corner by some trees. It was one of those places you go when you just need to get away from everything, and that's exactly what I needed. I sat down, leaning back against the cold wood, and just stared up at the sky. It was one of those clear nights where you could see all the stars. Normally, I'd find it calming, but that night, it didn't help. All I could think about was how unfair everything was. How I'd spent my whole life trying to measure up, only to be left with scraps while my siblings were given everything on a silver platter. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a second, I debated not looking at it. But curiosity got the best of me, so I pulled it out. Of course, it was a text from Emily. "Michael, where did you go? You need to come back. Let's talk about this." Talk?
yeah,
Right. I'd heard that before. Talking never fixed anything in my family. It was always the same old story, Mom and Dad explaining why things were the way they were, and me being told to just accept it. But this time, I wasn't in the mood for more excuses. I didn't respond to the text, just shoved my phone back in my pocket. Sitting there, I started to go over everything in my head. The years of being overlooked, the moments when I felt like an afterthought. I mean, sure, I wasn't a perfect kid, but I didn't deserve to be treated like I was less important than the others. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about being seen, being valued. And for whatever reason, my parents had decided that my dreams, my needs, didn't matter as much as Sarah's or Chris's. I don't know how long I sat there, but after a while, the cold started to creep in. Fall was just around the corner, and the nights were getting chillier. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, feeling the wind cut through the thin fabric. I thought about heading home, but the idea of walking back into that house, facing them after everything that had happened, felt unbearable. As I sat there, I realized something. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of always being the afterthought, tired of fighting for scraps of attention and support. And in that moment, I made a decision. I was done. Done trying to make them see me, done trying to fit into their perfect little family picture. I stood up from the bench, a new determination settling over me. It was time to focus on myself, to build the life I wanted without constantly seeking their approval. I didn't need their handouts or their pity. I was going to make it on my own, and I was going to show them exactly what they had overlooked all these years. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the family relationship I was letting go of, but relief that I was finally taking control of my own life. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. When I got home, I sat down at my desk and started planning. I was going to pour everything into my work, into building something for myself. And one day, when I had made it, when I had achieved success on my own terms, maybe then they'd see what they had missed out on all these years. But for now, I had work to do. It was time to start writing my own story, one where I wasn't just a footnote in someone else's success. This was going to be my time to shine, and I was ready for it. Update 1: It's been about 2 years since my last post, and a lot has changed. After that disastrous family dinner, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I was done being the forgotten son, the afterthought. It was time to forge my own path, without any help or interference from my family. I threw myself into work with a determination I'd never felt before. I started by putting in extra hours at my job, taking on additional projects and responsibilities. My boss noticed, and within a few months, I was offered a promotion. It wasn't anything huge, but it was a step in the right direction. I had always had this idea for a business in the back of my mind. Now, I decided, was the time to make it a reality. I spent every free moment researching, planning, and saving. I cut back on every expense I could think of, no more eating out, no new clothes, no vacations. Every spare dollar went into my business fund. After about a year of planning and saving, I finally had enough to start my business. It was a tech startup, focusing on developing software for small businesses. The first few months were brutal. I was working around the clock, trying to juggle client meetings, software development, and all the administrative tasks that come with running a business. My first big break came when a local business owner, impressed with my work, recommended me to his network. Suddenly, I had more clients than I could handle on my own. I hired my first employee, then my second. Before I knew it, I had a small team working for me. As the business grew, so did my confidence. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly succeeding on my own terms. I wasn't living in anyone's shadow anymore. I was creating something meaningful, something that was entirely my own. Of course, my family noticed the change. At first, it was just curious texts from Emily, asking how I was doing. I kept my responses brief and vague. Then came the invitations to family gatherings, which I politely declined, citing work commitments. Sarah was the first to really push. She showed up at my office one day, unannounced. When I stepped out to the reception area, I saw Sarah's eyes widen as she took in the office. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was modern, professional, and clearly successful. "Michael," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. "This is impressive. Why didn't you tell us about all this?" I shrugged, keeping my voice neutral. "I've been busy." She frowned, clearly not satisfied with my answer. We've been worried about you. You never come to family dinners anymore, you barely respond to our messages. Mom and Dad think they've done something wrong. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered all those years of feeling less than, of struggling while they sailed through life on our parents' support. I'm doing fine, I said. Better than fine, actually. I just needed to focus on my own life for a while. As the months went by, my business continued to grow. We moved to a bigger office, hired more people. I was even featured in a local business magazine as a rising entrepreneur to watch. The day the article came out, my phone was flooded with messages from my family. They were all congratulatory, full of pride and excitement. But mixed in with those feelings, I could sense their confusion and maybe even a little hurt that they were learning about my success from a magazine rather than from me. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Part of me felt guilty, but another part felt a grim satisfaction. For once, they were the ones on the outside looking in. They were the ones wondering, questioning, trying to understand. Chris was the next to reach out. He called me one evening, just as I was leaving the office. "Hey, little brother," he said when I picked up. "Long time no talk. I saw that article about your company. Pretty impressive stuff." "Thanks," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "It's been a lot of work, but it's paying off." "Look," he continued, "I know things have been weird with the family lately. But we miss you, man. Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? We can catch up, celebrate your success." For a moment, I was tempted. Despite everything, there was a part of me that missed my family. But then I remembered all those dinners where I felt invisible, all those times when my achievements were brushed aside in favor of Sarah's or Chris's. "I appreciate the invite," I said, "but I'm swamped with work right now. Maybe another time." As I drove home that night, I realized that my success, as satisfying as it was, hadn't healed the rift with my family. If anything, it had widened it. I was proud of what I had accomplished, proud that I had done it all on my own. But there was a loneliness to my success that I hadn't anticipated. Still, I wasn't ready to bridge that gap. Not yet. I had spent too long being the family afterthought. Now, I was writing my own story, and I wasn't sure if there was room in it for them anymore. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. Update 2. It's been about a year and a half since my last update, and my life has taken another dramatic turn. My tech company has exploded in growth, far beyond what I ever imagined. We've expanded our services and now cater to mid-sized companies across the state. Last month, we were featured in a national business magazine as one of the top 50 startups to watch. The day the article was published, my phone was flooded with congratulatory messages. But one stood out, a voicemail from my mom. "Michael, honey, it's Mom. We saw the article. Your father and I are so proud of you. We'd love to talk if you have a moment. Please call us back when you can." I was stunned. It was the first direct contact from my parents in over a year. I didn't call back immediately, unsure of how to respond after so long. A week later, I was working late when my assistant informed me I had visitors. To my shock, it was my parents standing in the reception area. They looked older, more tired than I remembered. Mom's hair had more gray, and Dad's shoulders seemed to sag. But their eyes lit up when they saw me, a mix of pride and uncertainty in their expressions. "Michael," Mom said, her voice wavering. "We hope you don't mind us dropping by like this. We needed to see you." I led them to my office, watching as they took in the view, the modern furniture, the awards lining the shelves. It was a far cry from the struggling kid they'd last seen. "This is quite impressive, son," Dad said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You've really made something of yourself." Mom broke the awkward silence that followed. "Michael, we owe you an apology. We've done a lot of thinking, and we realize now how unfairly we treated you compared to your siblings. We didn't see it then, but we do now. And we're so sorry." I felt a lump in my throat. This was what I'd wanted to hear for so long, but now that the moment was here, I didn't know how to respond. Dad leaned forward. We're proud of you, son. Not just because of your success, but because you did this all on your own. You showed us what you're capable of, and we were blind not to see it before. We talked for a while after that. I found myself opening up about the struggles and triumphs of the past few years. It felt strange but also somehow right, like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. As our conversation was winding down, Mom hesitated, then said, "There's something else we wanted to talk to you about, Michael. We need your help." I felt my guard go up immediately. What kind of help? They exchanged a glance before Dad spoke. It's about the family business. We're in trouble, son. The market's changed, and we haven't kept up. We're facing bankruptcy if we don't modernize quickly. We hate to ask, Mom added quickly, especially after everything. But we thought, with your expertise in tech and business. I sat back, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through me. Their apology had seemed sincere, and part of me longed to reconnect. But I couldn't help feeling suspicious. Was this the real reason for their sudden appearance? I need some time to think about this, I said finally. It's a lot to process. They nodded, looking both hopeful and anxious. As I walked them out, Mom hugged me tightly. We love you, Michael, she whispered. No matter what you decide. After they left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the city lights. I'd worked so hard to get here, to prove myself. And now, just as I'd reached the pinnacle of success, my family was asking for my help. The irony wasn't lost on me. Part of me wanted to help them, to be the bigger person and extend the olive branch. But another part, the part that remembered years of feeling less than, wanted to refuse. To show them that I didn't need them, just as they hadn't needed me. I realized that this moment was about more than just business. It was about forgiveness, about family, about the person I wanted to be. Whatever I decided would shape not just my relationship with my family, but also the kind of man I was becoming. I pulled out my phone and stared at it, my parents' number on the screen. To call or not to call? To help or not to help? The decision weighed heavily on me as the night grew later and the city below grew quieter. What would you do, Reddit? After everything, do I owe my family anything? Or is it time to finally close this chapter for good? Update 3, it's been a month since my parents asked for help with their failing business. Something didn't sit right, so I hired a private investigator. What I discovered left me reeling. The family business wasn't failing, it was thriving. They had just secured a major contract. But that wasn't all. The investigator uncovered years of financial manipulation. My parents had been funneling money into personal accounts, inflating expenses for Sarah and Chris's education and weddings. The $200,000 for Sarah's wedding? Much of it went into a secret investment account under her name. Chris had a trust fund, and Emily's tuition coverage was actually payments into a high-yield savings account. They hadn't just favored my siblings, they had actively ensured their financial success while leaving me out. I was furious. All those years of feeling less than, of struggling while my siblings sailed through life, it had been a calculated decision to exclude me. I called a meeting with my legal team. While most of my parents' actions were in legal gray areas, there were some questionable tax maneuvers that could cause trouble if exposed. I asked my parents to meet me at my office. They arrived looking hopeful, probably thinking I was going to help them. Their faces fell when they saw my expression. Sit down, I said coldly. We need to talk. I laid out everything I had discovered. With each revelation, I watched their faces crumble from shock to guilt to fear. How could you do this? I asked, my voice shaking. All these years, I thought I wasn't good enough. But you were actively keeping me down while lifting everyone else up. Why? My mother cried. My father tried to explain, saying they saw me as the strong, independent one. His words rang hollow. I don't want excuses, I cut him off. I want you to know what's going to happen now. I told them I had anonymously reported their questionable tax practices to the IRS. I had also sent evidence to Sarah, Chris, and Emily, explaining how they had benefited from our parents' deceit. Your perfect family image is about to crumble, I said. And this time, you can't buy your way out of it. My father begged, Michael, please. We can fix this. We'll make it right. I laughed humorlessly. That's the problem, Dad. You still think everything can be solved with money. But you can't buy my forgiveness. You can't buy back the years I spent feeling worthless. I stood up. Leave now. I don't want to hear from any of you ever again. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a family anymore. As they left, my mother turned back, tearful. We love you, Michael. We always have. I looked her in the eye. If this is your idea of love, I want no part of it. After they were gone, I sat in my office for a long time, feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and relief that I finally knew the truth, that I could stop doubting my worth. In the days that followed, I received messages from Sarah, Chris, and Emily. Some angry, some pleading. I didn't respond to any of them. I threw myself back into my work with renewed vigor. My company continued to grow, and I found purpose in mentoring young entrepreneurs from backgrounds similar to mine. It's been 6 months since that confrontation. There are still days when I feel the ache of what I've lost, or rather, what I never really had. But mostly, I feel free. Free from the weight of trying to prove myself to people who never intended to see my worth. I know some might think I was too harsh, that family should be forgiven. But I've learned that sometimes, the healthiest thing is to walk away from toxic relationships, even if they're with your own blood. To anyone who's ever felt like the black sheep, your worth isn't determined by your family's perception of you. You have the power to write your own story, to create your own success, to find people who will value you for who you are. As for me, I'm focusing on building my chosen family, friends and colleagues who support me, who celebrate my successes without jealousy, who are there for me in tough times without keeping score. Here's to new beginnings, to chosen families, and to writing our own stories, no matter where we came from or what we've been through. The future is ours to shape, and I'm excited to see where it leads.